That morning, the small town of Maple Ridge still slept beneath a thin veil of mist. The sky hung grey and heavy, the chill creeping through cracks in windows and across the damp sidewalks. The bare branches of maple trees stood stiff against the cold, and the only sound came from a faint breeze brushing past old wooden signs, and the first wafts of coffee drifting from the corner diner, bus No. 7. A familiar sight on these streets for decades, rolled out from the main terminal with a slow, almost reluctant groan. The tires were worn, the engine tired, but it moved forward, steady and dependable. Just like the man behind the wheel, Frankie Dawson, 76 years old. Frankie had once been one of the most reliable drivers in the city's transit company. He started back in the 70s, when the buses had no air conditioning and the roads were more gravel than pavement. He was a broad-shouldered man with a calm voice, always wearing his brown baseball cap and carrying a metal coffee thermos one his wife used to fill every morning. For 42 years, he never missed a single shift. 5 years ago, he retired. His wife, Eleanor, was battling cancer at the time, and he wanted every minute with her. They spent quiet afternoons on the porch, sipping tea, reminiscing about the past and the grandchildren they never got to meet. Those months were gentle and heartbreaking. She passed away last spring peacefully, without complaint. But before she left, she'd whispered one last sentence that never left his mind. "If you stop driving, Frankie, I think you'll fall apart." At first, he thought he could handle it. He kept the yard tidy, cleaned out the attic, took short morning walks. But one day, at precisely 6:45 a.m., the exact time he used to climb into his seat on the bus, he found himself gripping the steering wheel of his old pickup in the garage, tears falling down his cheeks for no reason he could name. A month later, he applied to come back part-time. Not for the money, his pension was enough. He came back because he needed the sound of the engine, the feel of the gear lever in his hand, the faces familiar or not stepping onto the bus each morning. A routine, a purpose. Now, every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, Frankie poured his coffee, pulled on his thick coat, and left the house at 6 a.m. sharp. He wasn't as fast as he used to be. His steps were slower, and his hands, those hands that once turned a wrench or carried grocery bags with ease, trembled ever so slightly. The shaking had started last year. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was the sleepless nights that followed Ellen passing. Some days, it took him a few extra seconds just to buckle his seatbelt. Sometimes he'd spill a little coffee lifting the cup. He never mentioned it to anyone. Maple Ridge hadn't changed much, but inside Frankie, everything was different. There was no one waiting for him at home, no warm dinner ready on the stove, no voice gently scolding him for forgetting his scarf. Just cold mornings and bus No. 7, the only place he still felt needed. He hated the pity in people's eyes when they noticed his hands. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted routine. He wanted motion. He wanted the rhythm of life to drown out the silence of loss. On his bus, he maintained his old habits, greeted every passenger, turned on the heater if it dipped below 40, and never skipped a stop even if only one person was waiting. This wasn't just a job to him. It was a tether to something real. That particular morning, as the bus turned onto the main road toward stop 4, where a rowdy group of high school kids, usually boarded, Frankie checked his mirrors, took a deep breath, and gently pressed the gas. What he didn't know was that today, he would become the center of a story the whole town would be talking about for weeks to come. Stop number 4 was one of the busiest on Route 7. Every morning, Groups of high school students would gather, their hoodies up, earbuds in, voices loud with jokes and laughter. This morning was no different. As the bus pulled to a stop, Frankie opened the door and nodded politely at each one, even though none of them responded or even looked his way, as he bent down to pick up a loose schedule booklet that had slid off the dashboard. His right hand trembled slightly. It always did now, and each time he stooped, it took him just a moment longer than it used to. A moment to steady his balance before standing up. That one brief hesitation was enough. A boy sitting in the second row snickered and called out, "Look at his hands. Dude's like a walking massage chair." A few others burst into laughter, piling on the joke. Bet he can't even see the red lights with those hands shaking like that. Frankie didn't turn around. He didn't speak. He just gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and stared ahead at the road he knew by heart. Inside, he felt a sting, faint but real. Still, not enough to rise to the surface. At stop 9, Mr. Whitaker boarded. The 89-year-old veteran wore a navy wool cap embroidered with the words World War II, Pacific Fleet. His coat was worn at the shoulders. His shoes shined but cracked with age. Mr. Whitaker was a regular rider on this route, always sitting near the back door, quietly looking out the window like he was watching a world he once knew slip by in. SLOW motion. Frankie gave him a respectful nod. Mr. Whitaker nodded back. No words exchanged and were needed. Something about the way the old Marine carried himself demanded silence and reverence. The ride continued. The students remained loud, their music leaking from headphones, their chatter bouncing off the bus windows, but something about the mood had changed just slightly. Then, as they approached a busy intersection, a car suddenly swerved in front of the bus, forcing Frankie to brake hard. The bus jolted. A few kids slipped from their seats. One of them yelled, "Geez, trying to kill us, old man." And just like before, the others laughed. It seemed like nothing had changed, but this time, another voice cut through the noise. Calm, firm, commanding. That's enough. Silence. Total and immediate. Mr. Whitaker had stood up, gripping the top of the seat in front of him for balance. The old man stood tall, thin, and slightly stooped, but with a presence that filled the entire bus. "I've fought beside men like him," he said, his voice not loud, but clear enough that everyone heard. "They drove trucks through bombs, through mud, and through hell. Their hands shook from fear, but they got us home." The bus remained still. The teenagers sat frozen. There was no comeback, no snicker, no nervous chuckle. Mr. Whitaker walked a few careful steps toward the front of the bus and stopped, facing Frankie, and then, in a silence so deep it could be felt, ... He raised his hand in a salute. Not a casual wave. A real salute, military, sharp, slow, and full of respect. Frankie didn't speak. He couldn't. His eyes shimmered not with shame, not with anger, but with a quiet gratitude that ran deep. There was nothing more to say. Sometimes a single gesture says everything. After Mr. Whitaker's salute, the bus fell into a quiet stillness. From stop 9 all the way to the end of the line, no one said another word. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the engine and the tires rolling steadily over the worn patches of pavement. Frankie drove in thoughtful silence. He knew there was nothing more to say, and he understood, more than most, that not all respect has to come with words. At the final stop, the students filed off the bus, one by one. This time there were no jokes, no side comments, no lingering smirks. Each of them avoided eye contact as if feeling the weight of something they couldn't quite name then. One boy hesitated near the front. It was the same kid who had made the first joke that morning. His headphones were still around his neck, but the music was off now. He looked up at Frankie, eyes a little red. He whispered, I'm sorry, sir." Frankie smiled softly. It wasn't a smile of triumph or pride, just warmth. He nodded, no resentment, no anger. Then he turned back, toward the wheel, resting his hands gently on it, waiting for the next route. That afternoon, Frankie came home earlier than usual. He brewed a cup of tea, the same blend Eleanor used to make for him every winter. The aroma filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, softening the memories of the noisy morning. He walked to the window and drew back the curtain. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same as always. The old maple tree in his front yard still dropped its golden leaves onto the sidewalk. The wind blew lightly, rustling the corners of the porch. On the wall, near the kitchen table, an old photograph of his wife still hung in its simple wooden frame. She was smiling, her eyes kind and bright, as if watching him from across the years. Frankie looked at her photo, and for the first time in many months, the heaviness in his chest began to lift. The quiet wasn't so heavy. The stillness wasn't so empty. And then, almost as a whisper, he said, "Sweetheart, today someone saluted me. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you've ever felt like the world moves too fast to appreciate the simple things, subscribe to our channel. We share real-life stories filled with emotion, kindness, sacrifice, and the little moments that touch the heart. Hit subscribe and join us each day for stories that matter."